Welcome to American Indian History. We're going to begin our study by looking at pre-contact times, and I want to set a foundation for you with this first PowerPoint. So to begin with, we want to think about American Indian history as a shared history. It is a perspective of many people, not just Native Americans. It is the perspective of Americans. It's the perspective of all of the colonists who came to the United States, and the interactions of those colonists along with all the native tribes that we see in America during pre-contact. So what is really important is to understand those perspectives, and that's what we're going to spend a lot of our time trying to do, is understanding why people came, what intentions they had when they were interacting, and what is the foundation of who they are as individuals. So to begin with, we want to also think about how are we going to look at American Indian history? Some people look at American Indian history as a history of conquest and colonization. By looking at it through that perspective, what we do is we discount a lot of the things that also happened during that time. American Indian history, as any history, is a history of choices. In American Indian history, what you're going to see is it's also a history of innovation. It's a history in which American Indians choose to do certain things because of the circumstances that they find themselves in. You'll also find that it's a history of resilience. American Indian people, as many people, find ways to survive, and that is also a big part of the history that I want you to come away with. So as we are looking at American Indian history, it's incredibly important to look at not only the history that you see in the textbook, but you'll see that I rely heavily on historical documents. Those historical documents are written accounts from oral histories. They're also accounts that people have recorded after the event has happened. Because history is a written event, we want to make sure that we take into account everybody's ideas and everybody's perspective of that history. So in looking at Native American history, which is traditionally an oral history, we want to make sure that we're looking at all the documents and evidence and accounts that we have access to. Many accounts, as you'll see, are also pictorial accounts. Native Americans, in many cases, drew certain accounts of different events throughout history, and we'll take time to look at those events as well, as they are incredibly important pieces of history that allow us to see the perspective of the American Indians and how they interpreted those events. What we'll do is we'll start this class by looking at creation stories. We have two perspectives, really, about American Indian history and how we could start. American Indians believe that they have always been in the United States, as well as different areas throughout the world. So by looking at creation stories, you'll be grounded in their perspective, as well as their ideas about their own creation stories and how they came to be in the United States. What you'll also see in the first chapter is our interpretation as Americans of how Indians came to America. You'll see things like the Bering Strait theory. You'll see evidence from archaeologists. What we do as people is we try to understand history. And for some people, it's very hard to understand history through creation stories. And so what we do is we find factual accounts. So what I want you to do is I want you to take into consideration both accounts, because that's what American Indian history is so much about, is understanding that it is a history of a people that have different belief systems than we do. And to value those beliefs and understand those beliefs is a part of understanding American Indian history. The story of American Indian history is a story of a people. It's a story of many, many people. As you'll see, we'll look at the next couple of slides, we'll see the population of American Indian people that were here prior to contact. So as a story of a people, we know that different people have different experiences, and we want to make sure to know what those experiences were. Obviously, not everybody has the same experience, so it's important to know that while we are learning about one account of history, there are all multiple perspectives, and we want to make sure that we see those, take those into consideration, and make sure that we look at as much evidence as we can get at any given time period in American Indian history. As I mentioned, we're going to look at the population of American Indians. I feel like that's a really foundational piece of evidence that you need to know as you get started in this field. By looking at the population, it helps you to see how large the population was here prior to people coming and colonizing the area, and how diverse that population was. So as you can see in this slide, pre-contact population was between 7 million people and 18 million people. Present-day population of Native Americans is 2.9 million people. So pre-contact, if we look at kind of the trajectory of that in about 1492 and versus present day, you can see that the population still has not recovered after several hundreds of years. Native American history, Native American studies is my passion. I'm really excited to be back in this field and excited to be sharing this with you. My background is studying Native Americans as well as looking at Native Americans in the field of the law. I took a very interdisciplinary approach. It's not just a look at history. When I look at Native Americans, I look through the lens of an anthropologist, a sociologist. As I mentioned, I studied federal Indian law. I also have background in history, literature of American Indians, geography, and gender studies. It's not easy to look through all of these lenses, but it's really, really important because it helps you understand that American Indian history is not just a study of facts. It's a study of people, their culture, their beliefs, and a look at how, through those beliefs, when they interacted with people, different things occurred because of those belief systems. And we'll see that there's a lot of different things that happen based on all of the different cultural groups that we'll study during this class. So as I mentioned, worldview is incredibly important. One of the first assignments that you guys will complete is an assignment on cultural areas. As you look at the map, what you'll see is several areas that are demarcated by color. Within those areas, anthropologists have grouped Native tribes. There are today recognized by the federal government 573 tribal nations within the United States. Within those nations, they have definite and defined cultural ideas, they have different economies, and they have different belief systems. So what anthropologists did is they tried to help us kind of group those people together, really based by and large on geography. What we'll see is, for example, in the Great Plains, most of those people hunted buffalo. The native tribes, they lived in teepees. We do see some variation with the way that they lived, but anthropologists tried to group them so that we can start to study and learn in a broad way, and then start to look in a little more defined way within those areas. So this is one of the first assignments you're going to complete for this class. Within tribal nations, as I mentioned before, there are those cultural areas. And within the cultural areas, tribes have different things that help us to understand how variable each tribe is. Each tribe, as you start to look at the tribe, has different economies. Those economies are based, by and large, on what's available within the area, as well as the sort of trade networks that they set up within their area. Tribes also have different political structures, which we'll be introduced to within the first couple of chapters as well. And they also have different belief systems that you will get to learn a little bit about through your study of the cultural area that you choose, as well as the creation stories. Within the first couple of chapters as well, you will get a look at several different tribal nations. Specifically, as I mentioned here on the slide, the Chumash, which is in California. They're a tribal group that lives very much off the land, and they have access to the sea. They have a trade network that is pretty impressive. We'll also look at the Iroquois Nation, who will become a big player in the next several chapters, as you'll learn about the Iroquois Nation and their Great League of Peace, a highly evolved political structure that some people say was the foundation of our Constitution. You'll also get a look at Chaco Canyon and Cahokia, which are really representative of some of the major economies and the major trade networks that were present prior to pre-contact or prior to contact. So one of the major things, as I hope you now see, that I really want you to get out of this class is American Indian history is a meeting of different nations. As I mentioned before, there are over 500 nations right now in America, and as we saw in the population slide, there could have been upwards of 18 million Native people here in the United States. Within those groups of people, they all clearly have different ideas, different values, and different goals. On top of it, they're going to meet several people coming in, English, French, different groups of people that also have very different ideas about what they want to happen in America. So what we'll see very quickly is kind of a colliding of ideas and values and goals in terms of what each group thinks is going to happen and what they would like to happen. All right, I look forward to working with you this semester, and let's get started.